Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Forbes staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, you're reporting that Ginni Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, has donated quite a chunk of change to Republicans. What can you tell us?
Sure. Her lifetime donations total at least $20,000, according to records with the federal government and some state governments.
I want to talk about the time frame here when it comes to these donations. Was the money given over the course of years or $20,000, which is a decent amount, over a short spurt of time?
The crux of the donations have come since 2010, so over the last 13 years. She has made some as early as 1992, though. The first donation I found from her was $500 to the Republican National Committee about a year after her husband joined the Supreme Court.
And have they all been to Republicans?
Yes.
I do want to take a step back here. Ginni Thomas has made headlines in recent years. She is the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. But aside from that, who is she?
She is a conservative activist who is pretty prominent. It might be in part because of her husband. It might not be. But she was very active in efforts to overturn the election. The January 6th committee unearthed a lot of information about her, text to Mark Meadows. She was at the rally that preceded the riot at the Capitol. And she was kind of sharing some, if not outright QAnon conspiracy, it was QAnon adjacent thoughts that she was sharing with Mark Meadows.
Let's talk about her relationship with former President Donald Trump. As you said, she was at that rally at the Ellipse right before the riot at the Capitol on January 6th. But aside from that, what do we know about her relationship with the former president?
Well, she's donated over about $2,500 to his committee and to his campaign and other committees that support him. She's also been a pretty good customer of Trump properties. Back when I was focused mostly on the Trump Hotel in D.C., there were a couple of times that she hosted some pretty prominent lunches there where she gave awards to people like the head of Project Veritas at the time. So, she's certainly fine with sharing some money with Trump, be it his businesses or his campaign.
She's an avid, ardent supporter of former President Donald Trump. You said that she has been texting QAnon-adjacent theories to Mark Meadows. Is there any evidence that her husband, a Supreme Court justice, shares these, what one would consider far-right views?
He is one of the furthest to the right members of the Supreme Court. Whether he's all in on some of these things that she is, we don't know. Just to state this up front, like this appears perfectly legal. She is absolutely within her own rights to make campaign donations to any candidate she chooses. The issue with this shows here is that, though, there's a coziness that you see between Ginni Thomas and a lot of politicians who often will have issues that could come up before the Supreme Court.
When you say coziness, the word ethics comes to mind. Is this a conflict of interest? Is this an ethical concern? I know you're saying it's perfectly legal, but ethics comes into play here.
It certainly could be. There's issues about separation of powers come up often between the Supreme Court, where they're asked to adjudicate in a dispute between, Congress and the president. And, well, here she is having donated to several Congress people who might be prominent in some of these suits. And again, it's not like it's the other way. It's not like it's the Congress people supporting Trump, but it certainly shows that there might be some sort of preconceived bias there leaning towards one direction rather than the other. But again, that's, we kind of suspect that with the current Supreme Court.
Let's look at the full picture here. Let's think about recent headlines, recent stories. The Thomases have been faced with allegations of conflicts of interest over the past few years. Can you give us the highlight reel?
Sure. The biggest one is ProPublica broke recently that Clarence and Ginni Thomas had taken some trips with billionaire Harlan Crow, who paid for them. And they followed up, and it turns out he also paid for tuition at one of Thomas's family members' private school, and paid for the rent, I believe, for Thomas's mother's house. So, there's a certain ethic. Oh, and you didn't declare those gifts. So there's certainly some ethical concerns about that.
Got it. And would you characterize this as a pattern of unethical behavior?
That's an excellent question. It's a willingness to push the envelope, I would say. The Supreme Court basically sets its own ethics. So unless his colleagues there decide they want to cramp down on this or come up with some sort of punishment for not disclosing these things, it's not going to bother him at all.
Zach, I do want to talk about his other colleagues. Clarence Thomas isn't the only justice who has been embroiled in questions of conflicts of interest in the High Court. So let's go through the roster. Justice Neil Gorsuch sold real estate he co-owned to the executive of a law firm with business before the court, according to Politico, and the transaction occurred just days after he was sworn in back in 2017. And Chief Justice John Roberts came under fire after a report revealed his wife, who's a legal recruiter, apparently has earned millions in commissions for recruiting attorneys for jobs at law firms, some of which had cases before the Supreme Court. So what I'm saying is, does this beg the question of the Supreme Court needing a strict code of ethics?
A lot of people would argue that it does. You're going to find a lot of watchdogs out there who would say absolutely, because they clearly can't be trusted to do this on their own. But it raises an interesting point. Like, these are Supreme Court justices who have spouses who are accomplished. And in the case of Roberts and also with Thomas, that they're very well regarded in their field and amongst some of their colleagues. So, are they just supposed to drop out of the workforce once their spouse takes a spot on the court? I mean, obviously no, but how to balance those things. The Gorsuch is obviously a different issue where it again comes down to the need to disclose these sort of things. Gorsuch was a little busy right after getting sworn in, shortly after, not only with the real estate around that time, but he headlined an event at the Trump Hotel D.C. after he had been sworn in. He had promised to do it before he knew he was going to be on the Supreme Court, and he held that promise. But there was also the appearance there of what's it like when a Supreme Court justice is headlining an event at the president's hotel.
Certainly raises a bunch of questions. Per usual, Zach, I'm very grateful that you're here to break it all down. Thank you so much.
Thank you.